The Paul Wells Show is made possible by McGill University's Max Bell School of Public Policy, where I'm a senior fellow.
We're live.
Right. Hello to the 50 people who joined immediately.
It's like TV, except
Different.
somehow better. Hi, I'm Paul Wells from paulwells.substack.com.
And I'm Justin Ling from bugeyedandShameless.com.
And we are waiting for Jen Gerson from The Line to join us. I have some other guests that I hope we can get on sequentially after Justin has said his piece, and if Jen manages to come and join us. There's a lot going on.
Yeah.
Chrystia Freeland released a letter this morning saying she's resigned from cabinet. It is, you spend your whole career waiting for a day like this. The fall update is supposed to come out today. Last I heard from inside the lockup, they had not yet taken the cloth off the covers of the fall update, and reporters are not allowed to see it because they don't know whether the government is going to release it today. There's a by-election underway. People are voting, or polls are about to open. They've just opened in Cloverdale, Langley City, in British Columbia, where the Liberals were going to have a hard day anyway. And this is my favorite part. There's a fundraiser tonight across the river at the Museum of History for the Laurier Club, which is the biggest donors to the Liberal Party. And the Prime Minister is supposed to address the cream of the Liberal donor class tonight. What the hell is he going to say? Anyway, so that sets the table. Justin, what the hell?
Yeah, no, what the hell is right? Like I was thinking today that there must have been some bet made at the last G7 leaders meeting to see which Liberal leader could tank their government most effectively. Between Macron and Olaf Scholz, Trudeau was giving them a run for their money. Listen, I mean, this is catastrophic, right? Like I've been talking to a couple of Liberal MPs and staffers in recent days who are just sort of beside themselves, who say that Freeland has made herself an enemy inside the government, and the government has made her a traitor to the cause. Everyone expected something to happen. Some people started speculating in recent days that all of the leaks that have been kind of weaponized against Chrystia Freeland in the news over the last week, all of these revelations that she's at odds with the prime minister overspending, that, she's tried to put her foot down so that the government can't send out $250 checks to everybody this winter, has basically, made her a position untenable within the government, but really no one knew in real terms what that meant. And now today, like everyone is just sort of scrambling. Like I've been talking to some staff and some MPs over the last hour who are just kind of beside themselves. Like they don't know if this government survives now. Like people who were adamant that the government's going to go to an election next fall are now saying like, I don't know, like we don't know if this is going to continue for days, let alone months.
I actually looked it up. In 1980, when the Joe Clark government fell. No, in 1979, when the Joe Clark government fell, it was on December 13th, and the Liberal government's Christmas party was underway. So this is only 3 days later, and there's a Christmas party tonight for the Liberal Party. So
and tomorrow is the staff Christmas party. So the fundraiser tonight, tomorrow is the staff Christmas party, and the cabinet shuffle is scheduled to happen Wednesday.
I don't even notice anymore whether they have Christmas parties for the journalists. It's been so long since I've been to a garden party. It's so sad.
But, listen, so I just finished editing my column on this for The Star. I don't know how I managed to vomit out so many words so quickly, but I somehow did. I think there's going to be a lot of speculation that this is kind of the byproduct of machinations over the last week or so. But really, this is a story of a government that has just completely seized up, calcified, rusted, and broken down, and now we're witnessing the actual kind of consequences and practical effects of what happens when you kind of have a government run by three people, and eventually those three people are going to disagree on something, and things sort of will fall apart as we're watching right now.
I've always thought that how an American president is always followed around by a naval officer with the nuclear football. Yeah. Since 2020, at least, Chrystia Freeland follows Justin Trudeau around with his political credibility, and she's got the codes. And what she did this morning was she inserted both keys and turned them simultaneously. And when you use gimmicks to describe your own government's fiscal policy and you're the deputy prime minister and the minister of finance, look, I'm going to go out on a limb here and suggest that's bad.
Yep. Yeah. So listen, we know 500 some odd people joining us. Maybe it makes sense to sort of go sequentially through just what the hell happened over the last couple of days, how we're watching a government collapse in real time. Maybe that's a useful thing. I imagine there's some people who woke up this morning to realize that, the country no longer has a deputy captain, to mix my metaphors a bit. And It might be useful to sort of break it down a little bit.
So there is naturally, in the normal course of things, a fall economic statement delivered by the finance minister. Traditionally, it's not a big deal. It's simply saying, here is the current state of economic growth. Here is the, our expenditures to date, our revenues to date, and our expected budget balance. But increasingly, since the 90s, finance ministers have often used it to announce little goodies, which, new policies, new programs, new tax measures. That requires a vote in the House of Commons to see whether MPs agree. It's a money vote. So if the members, in a minority parliament, if the opposition were ever to gang up and vote against it, that's the end of the government. We go to an election. And it's been weird because this fall update has been delayed for many weeks. And a couple of weeks ago, they announced that they were going to go today. And the prime minister also announced himself personally in a photo op in a grocery store. I was going to run a screenshot of Justin Trudeau standing next to a rack of stuff that was labeled white bread. And I was going to invite readers to tell which was which. But
that's pretty good. I like that.
But what they announced was this 2-month GST break from September 15th to February 15th. And these $250 checks to everybody in the country who is employed and is making under $150,000. The opposition, NDP and Bloc, howled because the checks were not going out to seniors. And fiscal hawks howled because it costs a hell of a lot of money. It's literally giving away money. And we're heading into uncertain water with the new Trump government. And some people suggested this was irresponsible. Then stories appeared in the Globe that suggested that a lot of this delay and confusion was because the prime minister and the finance minister disagreed about whether these measures were a good idea. And now this. So what are we going to look for? What are we going to look for next?
Yeah, I mean, this seizing up of, this fight between the prime minister and the finance minister or the deputy minister is so fascinating because, Freeland is 100% right here, right? Like these checks, this GST rebate is complete electoral gimmicking. It is fiscally irresponsible. It is nakedly cynical. It makes people feel gross. Oh, look, we have a Jen Gerson. We figured it out.
So this is Jen Gerson from The Line, and she has just downloaded the Substack app.
I'm gonna let Matt know that I'm in. Okay, here. Sorry, I'm with it. I'm here. I'm together.
So here's the thing, Jen. Justin was just catching us up, but let's let you talk. What do you make of the morning's events?
No, it's funny. So I was snuggling. I was giving my son a little snuggle in the morning as I was trying to convince him to get out of bed. And so we were snuggling up, and my husband snuck upstairs, saw us snuggling, and he poked his head over mine and said, "Freeland resigned." And I just started laughing hysterically and woke up. And then he's like, "Oh, and you should read her resignation letter. It's quite great." So on some ways, yes, it's a momentous pivot and a turning point, but the degree to which it will be those things is yet to be seen because we don't know how everybody in the caucus is going to react to it or not react to it. So a lot of this is it's hard to analyze at this point without the benefit of hindsight. I mean, it was a spectacular resignation letter. I mean, my husband and I were literally debating as to whether or not it was written on Friday night and then carefully edited to be a careful hit. I think it wasn't. I think it was written sort of Sunday night and read over once and thrown out. So clearly there's a lot of emotion behind the letter. I'm not sure that there's an enormous amount of strategy, like the people who are suggesting that she's setting herself up to be leader through this leader. I don't think that's so. I really don't. My theory of the case here, and hey, I could be wrong on this, is that the Trump election essentially snapped Freeland out of it. There was a real sense that after the Trump election, the sort of partisan haze more or less cracked for her. And I think she's actually been much more with it and much more clear-eyed about the situation that the country's in and the situation that the party's in since Trump was elected. And to me, what I loved about reading the resignation letter, it was like basically a confirmation of everything Matt and I have been screaming at the Liberals for the last year and a half. So it seems to me almost like she kind of came around on a couple of different files. And I think she just kind of, I mean, the obvious insult of being fired right before being asked to deliver a fall economic statement. Very few people would have tolerated that. Most people would have quit. And the fact that, Trudeau didn't have enough managerial new to see that one coming is pretty indicative of the state of his, interpersonal managerial skills at this state. I don't know. I'm just kind of rambling at this point, but
no. But let me just. No, I actually think yes, it does seem wrong. So we'll revive our old Oppo days, Jen.
Okay.
Because here's my read of it based on talking to people.
Jesse?
Oh God, I'm sorry for you, Paul. I think for the sake of your mentions, please don't be Jesse Brown. But listen, like from my understanding of people I've been talking to in and around the government over the last number of days, is that listen, like these $250 fuck you vote for me checks is the thing that fundamentally broke the relationship, broke the triumvirate, which is Katie Telford, Justin Trudeau, Katie Telford being the chief of staff, and Chrystia Freeland, right? Like they for the last number of years have decided on all things big and small. They are the real center of power in this country. And the fact that Chrystia said no to these checks was the kind of the rupture point. But here's the thing. I don't think she had changed fundamentally because of Trump. I don't think anything about Freeland's politics have shifted in any way, shape, or form. It's that she has always been more spendthrift. Ukraine being the exception is the thing I always hear. But she's always been skeptical of spending, right? Like she's thought of herself as the adult in the room that keeps saying, no, we can't afford this. The country can't afford this. I hear she's been one of the big blocks in getting Canada's defense spending up, which is something we ought to be prioritizing right now in an era of Trump. I've been told that she is the one who's inclined to say, we'll give you 50% of what you want in order to get this thing done, that you're not getting everything you asked for. She's trying to be, the voice of fiscal prudence inside the government, such as it is. Not that she's done a spectacular job of that, but apparently she's trying. And I think this was just kind of the last straw. And it's worth noting that over the last number of months and years, the prime minister has had this sort of break in relations with other ministers in the same way. Apparently, Trudeau and Melanie Joly didn't talk for months at a time because Joly had a fundamental disagreement with how the prime minister was handling the issue of Gaza. Not that Joly has much of an alternative plan. But all to say is that this is just another break in a long line of breaks. Bill Morneau was a similar circumstance. Jody Wilson-Raybould was a similar kind of divorce between the prime minister and senior ministers. So I think this is a trend more than it is, something that changed fundamentally about Freeland. And I think that's kind of where we got to.
I think it's a fair point. And of course, I mean, you're better connected in Ottawa than I am. I'm kind of out here in the boonies, and I like it that way. So, I would defer to your analysis on that point. And like I said, I don't think that her politics changed. I think that whenever anybody gets into a partisan party situation, particularly when they're in power, they have a tendency to get into bunker zone. Like there's almost like a partisan culty brain fog thing that happens. And my sense from Freeland is that is what kind of cracked after Trump. I think she genuinely got scared and genuinely realized that we can't do this anymore and we have to be a serious country now. And my suspicion is that she found the cabinet and the caucus and the leadership didn't get on board with that and instead engaged in what she would call the political gimmickry and the stunt of the $250 check. I agree with you. I think that probably was the breaking point. But there's more in that letter that suggests that there were deeper problems there. I mean, the comment about the premiers was also really indicative. Again, this is something that Matt and I have been screaming about. The reason why all the premiers in the country are going off half-cocked on their own sort of save our province strategy, and they're not getting behind a Team Canada strategy, that's a direct reflection of a vacuum of moral leadership at the federal level. That doesn't happen unless all of these people are looking to people like Justin and saying the leadership's not there, the vision's not there, the strategy's not there. So that's just kind of my theory of the case. But like I said, you're better connected in Ottawa than I am. So
So she's at this extraordinary moment. Where did she arrive at this moment from? I want to point out two previous big moments in her career as a member of this government. The first one is in 2019 when Jane Philpott quit the cabinet over the SNC Lavalin affair, which, strictly speaking, did not involve Jane Philpott. She resigned as a matter of principle. And that was the first of several moments where Chrystia Freeland made quite a show of announcing that she was still, the Prime Minister still enjoyed her confidence, as though anyone could doubt it, and that she was going to remain a loyal part of the team. And that was a gut check moment for the entire Liberal government, really for the entire Liberal Party. It was clear that the Prime Minister's behavior in the SNC Lavalin affair, his treatment of Jody Wilson-Raybould, at least debatable. And the question was, were you going to criticize him or were you going to stay? And just about the entire party said, we're going to stay with him. And Chrystia Freeland was part of that game. So she, given the choice, she laid out her credentials as the loyal. And the reward came in 2020, only a few months into the COVID crisis, a global fiscal calamity, which unfortunately here in Canada was compounded by the We charity affair. And Bill Morneau was a Team We charity. He was much more actually kind of tight with the Kielburgers than Trudeau was. And partly because of that, because his ethical lapses in judgment looked too much like Justin Trudeau's ethical lapses in judgment when it came to the Kielburgers. And partly because he disagreed on spending. They launched this astonishing leak campaign against Morneau, and then the PM accepted his resignation. And in comes Chrystia Freeland, where she was the one who understood the importance of a generous government that spent like a drunken sailor. And she was not going to be a stickler for fiscal probity the way that the idiot Morneau was. And so now this is the thing. The Loyalist has detonated on the day of it's prom day, and she's dumped her date. And happy to spend Liberal becomes the guardian of, she has become Bill Morneau. It's a hell of a trajectory.
You either resign as Chrystia Freeland or live long enough to see yourself become Bill Morneau. There's something in there. I haven't quite figured it out. Just actually a little bit of chronology here, because this is super interesting. The PMO official who was suspected of being the leaker targeting Bill Morneau is a guy named Ben Chin. Paul, what's Ben's title? Senior counselor, senior advisor, something along those lines? All of the jobs are meaningless in that government anyway.
Yeah, he's one of a few people with the same title, but he's essentially in the tier immediately after Katie Telford. Like he's like deputy chief of staff. I believe he's actually deputy chief of staff.
I think you're right. And people have suggested that he's the new Jerry Butts, right? Jerry being the former kind of chief strategist for the prime minister, but he doesn't quite have the same gravitas or weight in the government. Suffice to say, Ben Chin was suspected of being a leaker targeting Bill Morneau. Over the last couple of days, people have been going to Ben and saying, wow, I can't believe you're doing the exact same shtick targeting Chrystia Freeland. And he's done a big to-do of saying, oh, no, it's not me. This time, it's not me. I didn't do this. So there's a bit of actually palace intrigue about who exactly has been running these leaks on Chrystia Freeland, right? Like, is it Katie herself that's doing it? Is it another minister? Like, people have started wondering, is it Melanie Joly? Melanie Joly and Chrystia Freeland don't get along. Neither does she get along with Anita Anand. These are the three suspected leadership contenders if and when Trudeau ever leaves. So there's a second level of intrigue here where no one's quite sure who's running these leaks against Freeland, but I'd be very curious to know the truth.
It's possible that you're putting too much thought into this. That essentially,
someone has to be leaking it.
Well, no, but I mean, it's entirely possible that the entire caucus is in such a state of total disarray. Everyone's talking about everything. Everybody's gossiping. Everybody's spilling tea about everybody, and eventually, that's going to find its way to us. Because
the problem with that theory is that no one tells caucus anything. I speak to these MPs, and they're asking me for information. Like,
if there's tension between Freeland and Trudeau, that's going to make the rounds. Like, people are good. People can read into that. People can read body language. People gossip, right? Like, there may not be some grand strategy behind how this leaked out, is kind of what I'm saying. Unlike in Moreau's case, this might have just been the tensions between them were so obvious and so over the top that it was impossible to ignore. And eventually someone just started blabbing because, as we've seen, the Liberal caucus has lost its internal discipline, right?
Yeah.
And we've seen that's happened. I mean, earlier this week, there was a big fight that spilled out into media between two Liberal MPs whose names elude me. But that the lack of sort of psychological and emotional discipline that is spilling out at all levels of the caucus is now impossible to ignore. So there may not be some 4D chess thing behind all of this. I mean, Paul, I'm going to ask you this question, Paul, but my general assumption is that you can't actually maintain a government for very long unless you have allies, unless you can actually maintain allies. And yet 9 years later, here we are. It is the same story over and over and over and over again from the Prime Minister's office, and yet there seems to be never any shortage of people willing to step up to be another Trudeau loyalist. I don't understand why, but that could be because I'm borderline autistic and the world's greatest monster as a result. But why do people keep on doing this?
I wrote this when around the time Maxime Bernier quit the Conservative Party. Loyalty is the highest virtue in politics. It is the highest virtue in politics because it simply works better than not being loyal. Like, not 9 times out of 10, 99 times out of 100. We hang together or we hang separate. And people who've written thoughtfully about this, like Ian Brody in his book, At the Center of Politics, there's an interesting passage in there where he says he feels poorly for people who have never been partisan. He feels bad about people who've never been partisans, because we don't understand what it's like to put our selfish interests aside for an imperfect but more effective greater good. And if you read any political...
Slightly arrogant, isn't it? But that's fine. Slightly self-aggrandizing, Ian. Like, only we can possibly understand what it's like to put my selfish interests aside for the greater good. Fuck the soup kitchen, man. Those people, they don't know nothing.
He disagrees with you. But you won't read a biography of a successful political leader that doesn't have cases where they put loyalty ahead of intelligence and competence on their priority list. It's simply, it's near the end of Robert Caro's first volume on Lyndon Johnson is like that. He found a bunch of stone idiots that he kept close for his entire career in politics because they would jump into traffic for him. And that mattered to him more than somebody he could have a fun debate with. And I believe we will now see what happens when disloyalty is allowed into the chat, because the Liberal Party is now in big trouble. Incidentally, there's another theory on last week's stories, which is the one I wrote last night after midnight, which is that Freeland was the leaker, or someone sympathetic to Freeland was trying to get this out of a face-to-face conversation between Chrystia and Katie Telford and put it on the front page of the Globe, because there's a long track record of this government reacting. And I suspect that that's what led to the government icing the checks. They thought, let's try this and see if it's enough to keep Chrystia on board. Apparently the answer is no.
I think that's it's a very likely explanation for what happened. Also, just a little self-promotion. My column is finally just went up. I'm frankly proud of myself of getting a column up within hours of the resignation. But just to give you a sense of, the Star editorial decided that the headline should be Chrystia Freeland's exit seals it. Justin Trudeau's government is falling apart. I think that's pretty apt.
Yes, but it's not on the front page of the Globe, Justin, so we know they're not going to.
That's true. There's one thing we haven't even talked about. So, talking about loyalty, loyalty is to some degree a two-way street. The caucus has always and to some degree cabinet has always believed if we stay loyal to dear leader will look after us, and the sun will never set, and we'll have 1,000 years of productive grain production. But there's something really funny about this whole saga, which is that the lingering open questions whether or not the Prime Minister appoints Mark Carney from out in La La Land to join cabinet, which is a pretty offensive decision to make over the heads of all of your MPs and lower cabinet ministers who have been passed over for the job, who are apparently seen as too ineffective, too stupid, too unwashed, too uneducated to possibly fill up the upper echelons of cabinet. But I'm hearing just over the last hour, Carney is not joining. Like, Mark Carney is not joining. He's already passed up the invitation before, back when the Prime Minister was trying to push Bill Morneau out the window. Not interested in joining a government at odds with itself. And it seems like he's making the exact same decision today in watching a government eat its own. He has slowly backed away, saying, no, thank you, I'm not interested. So now the Prime Minister has kind of, shirked his own MPs to go attract new talent, a new outside consultant who has declined. And now he has to go back to his party and say, oh, I guess one of you will have to do.
Yeah. Welcome, Finance Minister Nate Erskine-Smith. But can I just say that today would be an excellent day for Mark Carney to grow a pair, get up on his hind legs and use his words and say, I am not interested in working in this government, rather than having it put about by people that they've heard what he thinks.
I know.
That shit is lame and it's over, and he's got to either demonstrate that he's ready to play big boy politics, or that he
Agreed.
needs to go off to whatever fabulously lucrative consultancy he stays busy with the rest of his time.
That's advice that's good for everybody in this government, by the way.
Yeah.
Counterpoint, he is not, in fact, ready for big boy politics.
Well, this is it. Not deciding is deciding, as we like to say.
Here's my unanswered question, and maybe there's a better procedural wonk who can answer it for me. Okay, so the fall economic statement doesn't have to be a confidence motion, because it depends on what's in the fall economic statement. If there's appropriations for new spending, for example, then it is effectively a confidence motion. So was the fall economic statement effectively a confidence motion? And if it was, because it had stuff in there that was to appropriate new spending, what happens to it now? A lot of the reporters who were supposed to attend that fall economic statement were told early this morning, essentially, that the 10 a.m. embargo basically has been indefinitely put back, which suggests to me that the entire goddamn document is going to wind up in a shredder, because there's no way in hell the government is going to test a confidence motion like 5 minutes after their deputies just resigned. Like that, I just don't think that's going to happen.
So I think I can answer this, because I'm almost positive there was new spending in there, because the Prime Minister has promised the premiers that there will be new money in the FBS for border security, right? This was the big request, not only from the premiers, but also from Donald Trump, of course. What's more, I've heard from Melanie Joly herself Friday. She was doing an event here in Montreal announcing their new Arctic strategy, which but she apparently I heard her relay the fact that during their dinner with President-elect Trump, Trudeau and Dominic LeBlanc promised not only money for more staff at the border, not only money for new helicopters, not only money for new drones, but also more money for our icebreaker capacity. We want to start building them icebreakers. So apparently something Trump was very, very impressed by. What's more, Bill Blair has announced that there's going to be a deep water military base in the Arctic. All of this costs money. Where does the money come from? It will be too late to put it in the budget next spring. It has to be the fall economic statement. There's going to have to be billions of dollars of spending in this document. And now it's all in limbo. They won't be able to release the things they've actually printed out because Chrystia Freeland's name is all over it. They must be shredded. All new documents have to be printed off. Who knows how long this will take? We could be in Christmas Eve getting a new fall economic statement.
We could be Christmas Eve getting a new fall economic statement, but also at the same time, if there's spending in there, it would also be a confidence motion. So could you imagine, in my beautiful, chaotic mind?
Pierre Poilievre is speaking. I'm going to see if we can hear him.
Oh, okay. Sorry, yes.
Oh, he's doing his 14-minute French statement before he speaks.
Right, we can.
Okay. I'll check in with Pierre in a minute. Ken White, friend to all of us, I believe, put a question in. Ken is the proprietor of Sutherland House Publishing, and he's reliable. He freaks out when everyone else is calm, and vice versa. He's the voice of calm today. He says, why can't the Prime Minister just replace his finance minister with sort of any random Liberal MP and carry on as though nothing had happened?
I think that answer that answer to that lies in what was in the fall economic statement. Because if the fall economic statement was a confidence motion, there's no way in hell any government is going to be confident that they can pass a confidence motion after Freeland resigned. That just strikes me as being self-evident. Like, too many Liberal caucus members have to be just willing to stay home at this point. Just they're not going to show up.
Well, counterpoint, there now has to be money in, and by the way, Paul, interrupt us if Poilievre switches to English.
Yeah.
But there has to be money to buy off the Bloc Québécois, right? The Bloc Québécois have put their price up. They basically said, if you can increase the GIS for seniors and I don't know, like fund a new statue of Bonhomme in Trois-Rivières, then we'll be happy to keep supporting you, as long as we get to go back to Quebecers and say, look, we're the only party that matters in the House of Commons. The Bloc is so easy to buy off. They do not have principles. All they want is more money for Quebec. And if they can get it, they'll keep supporting the government. The government would now have to pay that price if it wants to continue.
So one reader says the fall economic statement is not a confidence motion in itself.
No, it's
and that's
not
true. But if it
Yes.
proposes any measures, there has to be a money bill that goes to the House of Commons to enable that. And so what they could do is like stockpile and burn all paper copies of the statement they were going to put out, strip out the 4 chapters that propose any fiscal measure. And as for naming a new finance minister, it is true that if I was any one of 90 backbenchers who understood clearly that I only had a few more months as a member of parliament at all, I might take a finance minister appointment. But you would stand described by your predecessor as the minister for costly political gimmicks, which we can ill afford, and which Canadians doubt that we recognize the gravity of the moment. That would be, you'd need some chutzpah to take the job after she's described it thusly.
I'm just looking through the chat. I see a couple people wondering about the internal dynamics of cabinet. Oh, is it true that Freeland and Anand don't get along? Very true. Not only is it true, there are 3 ministers who I know of, maybe 4, who have staff in their offices who are running their proto leadership campaigns, right? Staff whose job it is to think about and worry about how to replace Trudeau if and when he goes. Chrystia Freeland is one of them. She is far from decided that she's going to run for the leadership, but she has staff dedicated to getting ready for it if it happens. Anand is another. Jolie is another. I hear Dominic LeBlanc has tapped a staffer to do exactly that as well. The leadership politics are already happening internally. And the prime minister apparently is not super thrilled about it, but he's tolerating it. And it is a dynamic that is affecting this whole thing, is that they're all jockeying for some degree of position. And I think Freeland's resignation has to be seen in light of her setting herself up to replace the prime minister. She might be the only MP left at this point.
And this is just me rambling about this, but is it not beyond absurd that Justin Trudeau isn't essentially cultivating a successor, cultivating multiple successors potentially? Why should he be angry about that? Shouldn't he be actually working to make sure that his successor is as well equipped as possible to take on the next job? Like, you've been in government for 9 years, my dude. Like, it got to end eventually. Like, there has to be some. This is something that's always really bothered me about Trudeau. Is like there doesn't seem to be any forward planning beyond him.
No.
Right? And I don't understand that. Everybody understands that they get into this job and that eventually they're going to leave this job. And if your interests are for the good of the party and the country and for the government, you have to put your own political legacy aside for a moment and start thinking, okay, well, who would actually be well equipped? And it doesn't have to be one person. It could be multiple people that you work with. But the idea that he regards any kind of political leadership organizing as being some kind of threat to him is really bizarre in my mind. It's really weird.
I don't know that it's seen as a threat. I think it's more seen as a distraction. And ministers, I think, have been... He has made it clear to some ministers, and not in particular, that he's not thrilled with the overt campaigning, especially as they're still ostensibly governing. Although, frankly, they've been governing less and less as time goes on. Yeah, I know.
Yeah. That's the ostensibly is doing a lot of work there. I mean, at this point, there has to be a certain point at which every political leader can recognize that they're the distraction. He's the distraction.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, some of us were pointing out a couple of years ago that if this government wants to continue existing, not only past the next election, but well into the next mandate, then it's got to have a plan, and it's got to, propound that plan and explain to people what their vision of government is. And you could argue that it really all started to fall apart. Like the end game began for Justin Trudeau when he gave Nate Erskine-Smith that podcast interview, and an MP of his own caucus said, "What's the plan, Stan?" And he said, "To continue to meet the moment." In other words, my plan is to occupy the office. And he throws it at me, and I will respond. Like it's like an old Reddit AMA, And well, here's the moment. He's met the moment. He's meeting the moment today. The moment is named Chrystia Freeland, and she's got teeth. So there you go, big boy. Meet it. What do you got now? And I think the answer is not a lot. The
other thing I would just add to that particular point is anyway, the thing I would add to that particular point is that as this government drags itself on, the cost for its continuation goes up, right? Like the cost in pure financial terms goes up. The cost the Bloc demands or the NDP demand goes up. But not only that, but there's a psychological and a moral cost. Like
100%.
Canadians are getting more pissed off the longer this is dragged out. They're getting more alienated. We're getting, more and more frustrated with the usual stuff. It's all the cost of dragging out this government goes up and up and up. Every successive week it continues.
And what I always
So-
don't understand, or what I don't understand about the thinking here, is that what are you getting in exchange for that cost?
Here's
Like,
Polly.
what is the vision?
Let's listen to the big guy.
Canadians were already anxious.
Can you guys
These
hear?
are reckless.
Yep.
$40 billion cuts that the government put in last spring. But today, in mere hours, they were expected to level that it was much higher than that.
We could be here all afternoon, but all three of us write for a living. So let's say farewell. Thank you to Pierre Polyev, our third guest on the show. He'll be going on. He'll be there all day. So let's just wrap it up. Hey, I want to thank the nearly 1,300 people who are joining us right now, and that number has grown throughout this call. So people sure seem to be getting something out of this talk. Justin, Jen, where can people find you?
www.readtheline.ca. That's where we are now.
And
Laughing
I'm
into this.
on bug-eyed-and-shameless.com, where I write about mostly not Canadian things. I'm in the Toronto Star, where I write about mostly Canadian things.
Now that we have figured out how to do this, we hold an awesome power, and we may use it again in the future. Thanks to
Yeah.
everyone for joining us. For Chrystia Freeland and all of the gang over at the Happy Liberal Party of Canada, have a great day. Cheers.
Book a spa day.
Thanks for listening to The Paul Wells Show. The Paul Wells Show is produced by Antica and supported by McGill University's Max Bell School of Public Policy. My producer is Kevin Sexton. Our executive producer is Stuart Cox. Laura Reguer is Antica's head of audio. Kevin Bright wrote the theme music, and Andy Milne arranged Kevin's tune for the closing theme. If you subscribe to my Substack, you can get bonus content for this show, as well as access to my newsletter. You can do all of that at paulwells.substack.com. If you're enjoying this show, give us a good rating on your podcast app. It helps spread the word. We'll be back next Wednesday.